At 10:15 in the morning on March 1st, 1954, the sun rose twice over Bikini Atoll. The first sunrise was natural. The second was man-made. For exactly 1 second, an artificial star burned 4 miles wide above the Pacific Ocean. It vaporized coral, it boiled seawater, it turned sand into glass. Then it kept growing. The United States had just detonated Castle Bravo, what they thought would be a 6-megaton hydrogen bomb test. What they got was 15 megatons of pure nuclear fury, 2.5 times what they expected, 1,000 times more powerful than Hiroshima, the largest nuclear weapon America has ever tested. Before we dive in, please consider dropping a like and subscribing. The blast crater measured 6,500 feet across, 250 feet deep, deep enough to swallow a 70-story building. The mushroom cloud climbed 130,000 feet into the sky, higher than commercial jets fly today, high enough to punch through the stratosphere. But the real horror wasn't the explosion itself, it was what came after. Within minutes, radioactive ash began falling like snow. Shino-hai, the Japanese would call it, death ash. The fallout spread across 7,000 square miles of ocean. It coated fishing boats 85 miles away. It dusted inhabited islands that had no warning, no evacuation plan, no idea what was happening to them. By the time the wind carried the contamination to Rongelap Atoll, children were playing in the radioactive powder. They thought it was snow. They had never seen snow before. The technical name for Castle Bravo was a dry-fuel thermonuclear device. Scientists had replaced liquid deuterium with solid lithium deuteride. This made the bomb portable, weaponizable. The fuel contained 2 types of lithium, lithium-6, which they knew would react, and lithium-7, which they assumed would stay inert. They were wrong. Under the extreme conditions of nuclear fusion, lithium-7 transformed into tritium, more fuel for the fire. The bomb didn't just reach critical mass, it exceeded every calculation, every safety margin, every prediction. Nobody had planned for 15 megatons. The US Atomic Energy Commission's first response was silence, then denial, then carefully worded statements about routine testing and expected yields. But you can't hide a mushroom cloud that touches the edge of space. Reports started coming in from across the Pacific. Contaminated rain in Guam, 1,200 miles away. Radioactive particles detected in India. Fish with radiation levels that made Geiger counters scream. Most urgently, 23 Japanese fishermen aboard the Lucky Dragon No. 5. They had been fishing 85 miles east of Bikini when the sky lit up. By the time they reached port, their skin was blistering. Their hair was falling out. One of them, radio operator Eikichi Kuboyama, would be dead within 6 months. The Marshallese paid the highest price. On Rongelap, 64 residents absorbed radiation doses of 175 rads, enough to cause immediate radiation sickness. Enough to guarantee cancer and genetic damage for generations. Children suffered the worst effects: thyroid cancer, stunted growth, birth defects that wouldn't become apparent for decades. The United States evacuated them 2 days later. 2 days of breathing radioactive air, 2 days of drinking contaminated water, 2 days too late. They told the islanders they could return home in a few months. It would be 50 years before Rongelap was declared safe for human habitation. But the real shock came when American officials realized they hadn't just created the biggest bomb in US history. They had conducted the most extensive human radiation experiment ever attempted. Without consent, without warning, without any way to undo what they had done, the fallout from Castle Bravo would circle the globe. The political fallout would last even longer. And for the first time in the nuclear age, the world began to understand what too powerful really meant. What started as a weapons test had become something else entirely. A glimpse of what nuclear winter might look like, a preview of environmental catastrophe on a planetary scale. The question wasn't whether Castle Bravo had succeeded or failed. The question was whether humanity had just crossed a line it could never uncross. The scientists at Bikini knew something was wrong within minutes. Their instruments weren't just reading high, they were reading impossible. Radiation detectors designed to measure the aftermath of a 6-megaton blast were pegging out at maximum. Seismographs recorded earthquake-level tremors from an explosion that was supposed to be contained. Weather balloons sent to track the mushroom cloud disappeared into radioactive heights no one had calculated, detonating simultaneously. They had built a bomb that surprised even them. The failure wasn't in the explosion, it was in the assumptions. Castle Bravo used lithium deuteride as fuel. Half of that lithium was the isotope lithium-6, which scientists knew would fuse under hydrogen bomb conditions. The other half was lithium-7. Lithium-7 was supposed to be inert, a harmless dilutant, dead weight. Under the extreme neutron bombardment of nuclear fusion, lithium-7 split apart. It produced tritium, more hydrogen fuel. The reaction fed itself, growing far beyond any containment scenario. The bomb had eaten its own safety margin. Within 6 hours, the radioactive cloud stretched across 200 miles of ocean. The wind carried it northeast, directly toward inhabited atolls that had received no evacuation order. Rongelap Atoll lay 100 miles downwind, home to 64 Marshallese residents who watched a strange sunrise that morning, and children played in it. The adults collected it in buckets, curious about this snow-like substance in their tropical paradise. Some tasted it. It was gritty, slightly salty, odorless. Within hours, people began vomiting. The radiation dose at Rongelap peaked at over 300 roentgens per hour, enough to cause acute radiation sickness in anyone caught outside, enough to contaminate everything the ash touched. Food, water, soil, children's toys. 100 miles northeast, Utiric Atoll received a lighter dusting. 167 residents absorbed about 14 rads each, still dangerous, still enough to cause long-term health effects. They had no idea what was happening to them. 85 miles east of Bikini, the Japanese fishing vessel Lucky Dragon No. 5 was hauling in nets when the western horizon exploded. Captain Hisakichi Tsutsui watched a fireball rise beyond the curve of the earth. His 23 crew members crowded the deck, staring at something no human had ever seen before. Then the radioactive ash began falling on their boat. They were in international waters, outside any exclusion zone. They had no warning, no protection, no understanding of what the white powder covering their deck and nets actually was. For 6 hours, they sailed through the fallout cloud. 6 hours of breathing contaminated air. His white blood cell count dropped to almost zero. His skin burned and blistered. His hair fell out in clumps. At Tokyo University Hospital, doctors had never seen radiation sickness this severe. They tried blood transfusions, experimental treatments. Nothing worked. Kuboyama's last words, spoken to his wife, were haunting in their simplicity. "I pray that I am the last victim of an atomic or hydrogen bomb." He died on September 23, 1954, the first victim of the hydrogen age. But the contamination didn't stop at human victims. The Lucky Dragon's catch tested positive for dangerous radiation levels. Tuna, mackerel, and other fish showed contamination far above safe limits. The Japanese government ordered the entire catch destroyed. Panic spread through Japan's fishing industry. Over 800 tons of tuna were condemned and burned during 1954. Fish markets closed. Consumers refused to buy any seafood from the Pacific. The economic damage reached into millions of dollars. The psychological damage went deeper. Japan, the only nation to suffer atomic attack, was being poisoned again by American nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, the US Atomic Energy Commission faced an impossible task. How do you explain that your routine test had accidentally irradiated 3 foreign nations? Their first strategy was minimization. AEC Chairman Lewis Strauss held press conferences emphasizing that Castle Bravo's yield was about what we expected. He described the Lucky Dragon incident as a fishing boat that was within a restricted area. Both statements were lies. Internal documents, classified for decades, revealed that AEC officials knew within hours that the test had exceeded all predictions. They knew the fallout had spread far beyond any safety zone. They chose silence over warning. The cover-up extended to the victims themselves. When the United States evacuated Rongelap and Utiric residents 2 days after the blast, medical teams collected detailed data on radiation exposure. They told the islanders it was routine healthcare. What they were actually conducting was the largest human radiation study in history. The Marshallese had become unwilling test subjects in Project 4.1, a long-term medical research program designed to track the effects of radiation exposure on human populations. The islanders gave no informed consent. Many couldn't read the documents they were asked to sign. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're watching from today, and if this story hits you, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. The technical success of Castle Bravo was undeniable. The United States had proven that dry-fuel hydrogen bombs were not only possible but devastatingly effective. The weapon was portable, deployable, and exponentially more powerful than anything in the Soviet arsenal. But the human cost was mounting, and the world was starting to pay attention. Japan filed formal diplomatic protests. The Soviet Union condemned the test at the United Nations. Anti-nuclear movements gained momentum across Europe and Asia. The age of atmospheric nuclear testing was beginning to turn against itself. The question was whether the United States would acknowledge the damage before it became irreversible. The knock on Eikichi Kuboyama's door came 6 months too late. By September of 1954, the Lucky Dragon's radio operator was in Tokyo University Hospital, dying of acute radiation syndrome. His skin was burned, his blood couldn't clot, his immune system had collapsed. US officials finally arrived to offer compensation. They brought a check for 2 million yen, about $5,000, the price they placed on a human life in the hydrogen age. Kuboyama refused the money. He died 17 days later, the first confirmed fatality of Castle Bravo. His death certificate listed the cause as acute radiation sickness, the first such diagnosis in the nuclear era. His last request was that his story prevent future nuclear testing. The Marshallese victims faced a different kind of abandonment. In 1957, 3 years after the blast, US officials declared Rongelap safe for resettlement. Radiation levels had dropped, they said. The island was habitable again. They were wrong. Independent testing revealed that cesium-137 and strontium-90 remained at dangerous levels in the soil. Coconut crabs, a dietary staple, concentrated radioactive materials in their shells. Breadfruit trees absorbed contamination through their roots. The food chain itself had become a delivery system for radiation. Dr. Robert Conard, the physician leading Project 4.1, published reassuring reports about Marshallese health outcomes. Cancer rates were within normal limits, he claimed. Thyroid abnormalities were not unexpected. His private correspondence told a different story. Declassified documents revealed that Conard knew thyroid cancer rates among exposed children were astronomically high. By the 1970s, 90% of Rongelap children showed thyroid abnormalities. Many required surgery to remove cancerous growths. Conard's study had documented these effects in detail. He had watched children develop cancer. He had recorded their symptoms, their treatments, their deaths. He had turned them into data points. The children suffered the most severe consequences. Their developing thyroid glands had absorbed radioactive iodine 131 like sponges. Many stopped growing normally. Others developed mental disabilities that would last their entire lives. Lekosian Jane was 9 years old when Castle Bravo poisoned his island. By age 12, doctors had removed his thyroid gland to prevent cancer from spreading. He would require hormone replacement therapy for the rest of his life. His younger sister, Mijua, developed thyroid cancer at age 7, the youngest recorded victim of Castle Bravo. These children became the faces of America's hydrogen bomb program. The ecological damage proved equally devastating and longer lasting. Bikini Atoll's reef system, built over thousands of years, was partially vaporized by the blast. The crater remained a dead zone, too radioactive for coral growth. Fish populations crashed across hundreds of square miles. Plutonium particles settled into lagoon sediments. Cesium contaminated the marine food web. Strontium-90 mimicked calcium, concentrating in shellfish and coral structures. The contamination worked its way up the food chain. Small fish ate contaminated plankton. Larger fish ate smaller fish. Humans ate the apex predators. By the 1980s, fish caught around Bikini still showed unsafe radiation levels. The international response escalated throughout 1954. Japan's fishing industry demanded compensation for destroyed catches and lost revenue. The Japanese government calculated damages at over $100 million. Anti-American sentiment reached levels not seen since World War II. Prime Minister Shigeru Yoshida faced massive protests calling for Japan to withdraw from its defense alliance with the United States. The hydrogen bomb had poisoned more than fish. It had poisoned diplomacy. India, led by Prime Minister Nehru, called for an immediate ban on atmospheric nuclear testing. Britain and France, developing their own hydrogen bomb programs, quietly supported continued testing while publicly expressing concern. The Soviet Union seized the propaganda opportunity, condemning American nuclear imperialism while secretly accelerating their own hydrogen bomb development. Meanwhile, the US Atomic Energy Commission faced a credibility crisis at home. Journalists began investigating the gap between official statements and radioactive reality. The New York Times, Washington Post, and major networks started asking uncomfortable questions about fallout patterns, exposure levels, and victim compensation. AEC Chairman Lewis Strauss found himself defending increasingly implausible positions. The Lucky Dragon was in a restricted zone, he claimed, except the zone hadn't existed when they entered it. The fallout was harmless, he insisted, except it had killed a man and sickened hundreds. Public trust in official nuclear pronouncements began to erode. The scientific community split along political lines. Government scientists defended Castle Bravo as necessary for national defense. Independent researchers raised alarms about atmospheric contamination and genetic damage. The Atomic Scientists Bulletin moved its doomsday clock closer to midnight. Dr. Linus Pauling, who would later win the Nobel Peace Prize for his anti-nuclear activism, began collecting data on global fallout levels. His research revealed that Castle Bravo had measurably increased background radiation worldwide. Strontium-90 from the test was detected in children's teeth across North America and Europe. The hydrogen bomb hadn't just poisoned the Pacific, it had poisoned the planet. By 1955, the political pressure became unstoppable. Japan threatened to reconsider its alliance with the United States unless atmospheric testing stopped. NATO allies expressed private concerns about fallout reaching their territories. The Soviet Union proposed a test ban treaty, putting America on the diplomatic defensive. President Eisenhower faced an impossible choice. Nuclear testing was essential for maintaining America's strategic advantage, but continued atmospheric tests risked alienating allies and energizing peace movements worldwide. The hydrogen bomb had become too powerful for its own good. The Marshallese, meanwhile, remained trapped between competing powers. In 1969, the US began a cleanup effort at Bikini Atoll. They scraped contaminated soil, they planted new vegetation, they built concrete housing for returning residents. Then they discovered that the concrete had been made with radioactive coral. The cleanup had spread contamination instead of removing it. In 1985, 31 years after Castle Bravo, the people of Rongelap made a desperate choice. They abandoned their homeland again. Despite 3 decades of US assurances that their island was safe, cancer rates had not decreased. Children were still being born with thyroid defects. Miscarriage rates remained abnormally high. The Greenpeace ship Rainbow Warrior evacuated 300 Marshallese to other islands. It was the second exodus from their ancestral home. This time, they chose exile themselves. The US government protested the evacuation as unnecessary. Medical data, they claimed, showed no significant health risks. The Marshallese disagreed. They had buried too many children to believe official reassurances. By then, the full scope of Castle Bravo's legacy was becoming clear. Long-term studies revealed that exposed Marshallese had developed thyroid cancer at rates 20 times higher than unexposed populations. Women who were children during the blast suffered elevated rates of miscarriage and stillbirth. Birth defects appeared in the second and third generations. The genetic damage was generational. Castle Bravo had poisoned not just the people who lived through it, but their children and grandchildren. Dr. Robert Conard, who had run the medical surveillance program for decades, finally admitted what many had suspected. The Marshallese had been used as human test subjects. Their exposure was not just documented, but exploited for scientific research. The environmental contamination proved equally persistent. In the 2000s, scientists using advanced detection methods found that Bikini Atoll remained dangerously radioactive. Cesium-1, 37 levels in local produce exceeded safe limits by factors of 10 to 20. A study published in 2017 found that radiation levels in the Bikini Lagoon were still higher than Chernobyl's exclusion zone. Plutonium contamination in the crater sediments would remain dangerous for 24,000 years. The island paradise had become permanently uninhabitable. The legal battles stretched across decades. In 1988, the US Congress established the Nuclear Claims Tribunal to compensate Marshall Islands victims. The tribunal awarded over $2 billion in damages for personal injury, property damage, and environmental restoration. Congress appropriated only $150 million. The remaining claims went unpaid. Victims died waiting for compensation. Communities remained displaced. The test spurred negotiations leading to the 1963 Limited Test Ban Treaty, which prohibited atmospheric nuclear testing. Over 100 nations signed the agreement, driven partly by evidence of global contamination from Castle Bravo fallout. But the treaty had a crucial limitation. It banned atmospheric tests, not underground ones. Nuclear powers simply moved their testing underground, where explosions remained hidden from public view. The instruments of mass murder that poison everything they touch. In 2024, 70 years after Castle Bravo, the Marshall Islands government filed a lawsuit against nuclear weapon states at the International Court of Justice. They argued that the continued existence of nuclear arsenals violates international law and threatens small island states with destruction. They demanded immediate disarmament. The case remains pending. 9 nations still possess over 13,000 nuclear weapons. Many are hundreds of times more powerful than Castle Bravo. The ultimate question Castle Bravo poses is not technical or political. It is moral. What kind of species builds weapons capable of poisoning the planet? What kind of civilization tests those weapons on inhabited territories? What kind of future are we creating when our greatest scientific achievements are instruments of mass destruction? Castle Bravo was not an accident. It was not an anomaly. It was the logical result of a mindset that treats entire populations as expendable in pursuit of military advantage. The radioactive ash that fell on Rongelap 70 years ago is still there. It will outlive our children, our grandchildren, dozens of generations who had no voice in the decisions that poisoned their inheritance. If you found this story important, consider yourself part of the generation that can prevent the next Castle Bravo. Subscribe, share, and demand accountability from leaders who still view nuclear weapons as acceptable tools of statecraft. Because the next test might not be in the middle of the Pacific, it might be in your backyard. The hydrogen age is not over. It is waiting for the next moment of human failure, technical miscalculation, or political miscommunication. And when that moment comes, there will be no evacuation plan for planet Earth.